horror is not a monolith. You can probably get a different definition of horror from every person you ask. Both in films and gaming, it is very common to have some creepy gleeby-deeby chasing the main characters. That's probably the most basic and straightforward kind of horror, and it's mostly effective just because of pure shock value. Then there is psychological horror. Sometimes it's not even actively scary, but it dares to venture into deeply uncomfortable topics or events that leave people's psyche scarred to create a lasting impact rather than a temporary thrill. And then there is the fear of the unknown, or rather fear of the uncanny, something that seems familiar, but also not. No, I am not a human is exactly that, and it uses the uncanny valley effect masterfully to build mistrust and paranoia. When I first set my eyes on No, I'm Not a Human, I had no clue what kind of game I'm looking at. I only knew that it looked damn interesting. It's weird, crusty, and has that "have you seen this man in your dreams" aesthetic. The basic premise is that the sun is fucked and is burning anyone who dares go out during the day. That alone causes a lot of chaos and brings a theme of isolation. With all due respect,
fuck the sun!
But on top of that, during the night, creatures called the Visitors come out and kill people. You know how there are theories that the uncanny valley is an evolutionary trait that causes people to fear things that look human but aren't, because there might have been some human-looking predator, like a vampire for example. This is exactly that. The Visitors take the shape of people and try to blend in with regular folks looking for a refuge amidst the chaos. They blend in and they kill. The problem is, during the night everyone looks strange and creepy, and everyone's a stranger, so there's no telling who you can trust. The core gameplay loop is something akin to Papers, Please, with a dose of good old mafia. Among Us, if you will. Every night people come knocking at your door, and you have to decide whether to let them in or not. Naturally, you might not want to let anyone in, not just because they're strangers, but because they might be killers. Yet at the same time, it's a life or death situation for everyone amidst the chaos. So if you have any morals, you might be inclined to save as many people as possible. Or if not, it's simply too dangerous to stay alone. During the day, the player gets a drip feed of news regarding the Visitors and ways to identify them. The player can use a limited energy resource to test the refugees for signs of being visitors. But it's pretty unreliable and inhuman things, like perfect white teeth or hairless armpits. Some completely normal person might have these things, or some actual visitor might have just 2 or even a single sign, so it's still hard to tell conclusively who's who. Guess right and you survive, guess wrong and people start dying. So you'll have to be in the uncomfortable shoes of a lyncher and start blasting.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bah! Bah!
I kind of separated this game from the other kinds of horror in the intro, but truth be told, the horror in No, I'm Not a Human goes in all sorts of directions. There are actual big bads that are more obvious than your disguised visitors that you need to be wary of, and they act as the main hurdles that you need to pass for progression. And there are definitely elements of psychological horror. I mean, it can be really tough being the one who calls the shots. Literally. All these people seem desperate, all of them have some tragic backstory, yet none of them can be trusted. Paranoia is, as I mentioned, the name of the game. Every single night you can see the world going to hell through your windows without being able to do anything about it, but try to survive. And aside from all that, the initially empty house and the protagonist have their own sad stories too, that can be partially uncovered if you're thorough enough. But hey, you can get a cat! And yes, you absolutely can pet it. Whee! I really love the way the game looks. It is lo-fi, yet at the same time it looks nearly photographic, just shown through a crooked and distorted lens. Every character is like some morbid caricature of themselves with some features wildly exaggerated, but that makes all of them really memorable. The nights enshroud the screen with some sickly green hues, as if shown through night vision goggles, and it makes the already crooked shapes even more creepy and uncanny.
The shape of the sun
Although these people look scared during the day too. People are scary. And I love the whole old school limited palette color banding effect. I like the little radio thing and how it's tricky to get a clear signal. Since there's no voice acting, the text gets scrambled, and it's cool how you can still make some things out even if the frequency is still slightly off. The soundtrack is fittingly haunting. During the day it sounds somewhat cozy, but it's slightly off, as if it's played through an old and nearly broken gramophone. The same theme would slow down during the night to become fittingly more unsettling and even more out of tune. The soundtrack would often feel like a fairly passive drone, but it works very well together with the visuals. There are some nuances to the gameplay that make things even more tricky, and they come mostly in the shape of resource management. First of all, energy is very limited and crucial. It is used to inspect people for visitor traits. Then the people themselves are like a resource. Having some regular people around grants a degree of safety. They can be killed if there's a visitor mixed in, or they can be taken for tests by government guys in hazmat suits. And then there are consumable items. Most of them replenish energy, but there's also kombucha, which allows to save the game and is extremely rare. Some of these items can be acquired as bribes when you initially refuse to let people in, but not everyone has a bribe. Sometimes the player has to pass inspections too to prove they're not a visitor, and that's where the consumables come into play. You might get bloodshot eyes after having an energy drink, and that would make you a suspect. But on the other hand, you need to smoke to make your teeth look more yellow, because perfect white teeth is the first discovered sign of the visitors. And then there's Bobber Beer Kurva! Ja perdole! There are some predetermined events, but most of the guests are also randomized, so with the limited saving, plenty of conditions to fail, and knowledge increasing with every run, no, I'm not a human is like some weird kind of roguelite, but one that I can actually enjoy. It's just that this saving system is not quite ideal. In a way, the very limited saves prevent saves coming, and it makes sense in this kind of game, where every decision matters. But at the same time, there's not even saving and quitting, so the player is most likely forced to play an entire run of the game in one sitting, which might take up to 2 hours. It's not terribly long, but not being able to pause is inconvenient. On top of that, sometimes the RNG gods can also be very cruel. I generally like the mechanic of the hazmat guys taking away people, because it incentivizes the player to accept more guests, but they take people away at random, and they often tend to take away people related to the story, messing up an entire run if you want to complete some objective or get a specific ending, of which there are 10. So overall, No, I Am Not a Human is a nice little horror game with a very alluring art direction. It's fairly short, but it's quite replayable. Things I haven't seen before would happen upon new playthroughs, and the RNG elements would keep things tense, although some aspects of the game would get a bit repetitive. And that's about all I can say without getting into major spoilers. Now unfortunately, I need to stray from the game a little and get into politics. If you're one of those people who think politics should be kept out of art or gaming, this might be your cue to leave. That's what is a little silly to me personally though, since some of the most successful gaming series are pretty much propaganda machines, or when Disco Elysium exists and kicks a lot of ass.
Kill me down!
Anyway, I'm a big proponent of indie games, and I typically want small devs to get paid. But the problem lies with the fact that the team behind No, I'm Not a Human, Trioskaz, is Russian. Now, my stance on the Russian invasion of Ukraine is pretty firm, and I try to boycott anything that supports Russia as much as I can. I only found out that Trioskaz is a Russian team after my purchase of the game, and the sparse saving system which forced me to play in longer sessions made me unable to refund the game. Since the start of the war, I've been avoiding covering Russian games that are not abandonware, in order to not affect the sales of the games. There have already been games that felt perfect for the channel that I had to give up on reviewing. Why do I care so much? Well, living in a country that shares a border with Russia is no fun. To take a quote from my Georgian man Gatsu,
The Russian authorities put on a blindfold with flags of all of their neighbors up on the wall and then throw a dart and invade whichever one it lands on every 5 years.
it feels that if Ukraine falls, Lithuania might very well be next. The atrocities and war crimes that are happening in Ukraine aside, the whole conflict has soured my personal life way more than I'd like to. I am aware that a single indie game purchase won't fund the Russian military or offset all the Russian oil deals, but a boycott is all or nothing. If a person buys one Russian thing, they might buy more. And where do you draw the line? It's not like the devs can openly denounce the war and their regime, because that's not a very smart thing to do in a dictatorship. Even if all is good with their hearts, ultimately their tax rubles will still end up going towards the Russian government. Well, at least it's not straight up connected to Russian oligarchs like Atomic Heart. And I'm aware that I'm quite hypocritical in still making this video when I could just not and avoid all this drama. It's just heartbreaking to see talented people being trapped in terrible countries. I do think that No, I'm Not a Human is a game that is worth money, but I personally would be more comfortable hoisting my Skull and Bones flag, you know what I'm saying? I can't tell you what to do, but that's my moral standpoint. It's a very morally grey situation, so it's ultimately up for you to decide which conviction is stronger. Supporting indie devs who create cool stuff, or boycotting Russia, which is responsible for many war crimes. I guess there's just the exception of you being a Russian resident. In that case there's no foreign money flowing in, so the purchase is all good in support of the devs, I guess. Devs, sorry if you're watching, but as they say, nothing personnel, kid. Man, what a mess. I'm sorry for going to this whole rant, but it just wouldn't sit right with me if I didn't make it. Tell you what, I don't make shit from these videos and I barely ever reach the $70 threshold to receive my YouTube money. But if this video somehow ends up doing numbers and makes at least half of that, I'll donate it to some Ukrainian charity. Deal? Alright, thank you for watching. I hope you found the video interesting and the rant didn't leave you too butthurt. And I'll see you in another video.